Woohoo, look at all those worms. I wonder where they came from. Hopefully not out of the bag. We're outside. I've got my outdoor worm bag over here that we're getting ready to feed, and I just removed it from where it was resting on the ground, and you can see a whole bunch of worms, and it's making me wonder, do I have holes in the bottom of my bag? I might. Or are these just worms coming up out of the earth to try to get into my bag? I don't know what the story is, so maybe I'll take a peek at the bottom of my bag, but I'll do that later. Right now we're just out here to put some food into this bin. So I'm going to reposition the camera, give us a slightly better view of what's happening here as we open up a spot to put the food in and get these guys fed after, it's been 10 days now. 10 days since the red wigglers and the European night crawlers in here got last fed. So let me go grab their food and then we'll get to feeding them. I put the old container that the worms were in underneath, and I'm resting the bag on top of it so we can work without having to hunch over. So let's bring the camera in a little bit closer and see what we got going on. So in here we've got one of our little composting friends. He's already rolled up into his bashful shape. It's a isopod. I guess some people refer to them as roly-polies because they roll up into a little ball. I used to have these in my worm bin indoors, but I recently don't see many. And I've been tempted to try collecting some to bring them inside because they do help break down tougher, harder materials. So maybe someday I'll try to collect some and try to reintroduce them into my indoor bins because they are the type of helper creature in the bins that I like. And oop, there he goes. And I don't mind having them in there, even though some people are purists and want worms only. I'm not a big opponent of having helper creatures in the bin to assist the worms in breaking the material down. Now, unlike my indoor bins, I've left the plastic on this one, but most of my indoor bins, if not all of them, for the most part, I think with the exception of my brand newest bin, have all had their plastic coverings removed. Because moisture is not really that big of a problem anymore in the humid days of summer. I did poke around in this bin yesterday, and I did actually stumble across a couple of our experimental items that we had placed in here. And one of them is the stem of a pumpkin, which is starting to disintegrate pretty good, and the other one is it's a cork, which we actually stumbled on, I believe, at the last feeding. And we were actually observing at that time that this material was beginning to break down, and I was able to take little chunks out of it, a little bit chip away at it, which was something I was unable to do when it was still new. So maybe there is still some hope for cork. Even though it is a very tough material, it does seem like it might eventually get broken down too. So I'm not actively tracking these. If we run into them once in a while, that's fine, but I just thought it was a curiosity. Since I had found them, I thought I would set them aside so we can show them in the video. But they're just going to go right back in with the rest of the stuff. So I'm going to start peeling things back here. The one thing about this material is that it's super loose and light. It's the way I like it. My indoor bins have been suffering from perhaps a little bit of excess moisture lately, and the material is really clumping together big time, but this stuff really flakes apart perfectly no matter where I pull the material from, all the way down low, everywhere. The material is almost perfectly consistent throughout and very light and loose and easy to handle. Oop, I don't know, this might be the remnants of some sort of a food item that they received last feeding, because there's a nice little ball of worms here chilling out, having a little bit of a party. Just something you normally don't see unless there is a large chunk of food nearby for them to congregate at. And I believe that that might actually be a thing that helps promote reproduction, because if you're gonna have a whole bunch of worms gathered together in a single spot, it does seem inevitable that they're gonna eventually, at least some of them, they're gonna begin getting frisky and mating. So I think that I even read that somewhere. A lot of people have been asking about mating, how to promote the reproduction of worms, and it's really not a topic that I've got a lot of knowledge of. I've always been sort of lucky, I guess, that all my worm bins are fairly active in terms of reproduction, so I've never felt like I had to tackle that as a problem and deal with it. So I've never really looked at it from the point of view of needing a better solution. It's funny, when you try to open up a crevice like this, it's always hard to keep it open because the worms squirming on the sides tend to try to collapse the material inwards. So you might have saw it earlier when I was shooting from the other angle. I did have some stuff laid out here for them on the table, and some of it was these stems, which I might not put in here. I'm actually thinking more along the lines of the leaves. These are all from a horseradish. I had planted a horseradish, but when I received it from a friend of mine, the only thing I was really after was the root so I could plant it. But it was given to me with all the leaves, the entire plant, so I figured I would chop it up and compost it. But those harder bits, those stems, I'm going to stick those into my other bin. I've got another outdoor bin which was never really seeded with any composting worms. It was just an outdoor bin into which I've been placing all my kitchen overflow. And it's actually a place where things vanish very, very quickly. And I believe it's mainly because of the presence of black soldier flies in that bin. So every year they seem to move in, and as soon as they do, the material in that bin just vanishes 1, 2, 3, because they're voracious eaters. And if you want a fast composting bin, then black soldier flies are certainly the way to go. Although the compost that they leave behind is, I think, not quite as nutritious for your plants if you're going to use it as a growing medium. And I also think that they transform more of what they eat into growth as opposed to just pooping it out the back. So they also leave behind much less vermicast, or whatever you want to call it. I think with black soldier flies it's referred to as frass, but I could be incorrect. So into here, on top of the leaves, I'm going to sprinkle a little bit of grit. So I bought some grit out here with me to include in this feeding. I've been a little bit stingy on grit out here, so I decided I'm going to try to do a better job of making sure that these guys receive grit with their feedings. And I guess the main course, which is not in here yet, the reason I made such a large hole is, drum roll please, it's half of a watermelon, almost half. It's got a little bit of a diagonal cut in it, but it was originally cut in half. A few slices were taken off of it, and then it sort of got forgotten about. Sat in the refrigerator for way too long, and at this point it's a little bit nasty, but I think the worms are going to love it, and I don't anticipate it sticking around very long. I also noticed that, you know, the material is kind of dry. It's nice and flaky. I like it that way. But I thought that the addition of some moisture would be a beneficial thing in this bin at this point. So that's the other reason I thought that this watermelon would come in perfect. So, I don't know, what are we going to do? I'm going to check in on this thing, you know, in another week or 10 days to see how that's coming along. And it should be interesting to see what's left. I would imagine that they're going to carve out all the soft stuff, and there's probably going to be a shell remaining after another 7 or 10 days, or maybe not, we'll see. So let's just cover this thing up and let these guys get to work. I think because there's such a tempting food item in here, I might actually take the old trash pail that these worms used to live in, the one that we're propped up on right now. I might actually use that to try to cover things up over here. So I would hate to, I'd hate to have some sort of a visiting creature in the yard come in here and smell the watermelon and take an interest and rip things to shreds out here to get at the watermelon. So I think in the beginning I'm going to keep this thing covered with the trash pail in the interest of protecting the bin from scavengers. So I do have all kinds of raccoons and squirrels and rabbits. I don't think rabbits would cause a problem, but possums, you know, I think anything big enough to, you know, pull off my coverings, which aren't much. There's just a little bit of cardboard here to cover things up. And oh, almost forgot the plastic. And this stuff is pretty easy to lift off if you were an animal the size of a possum or a raccoon. So for that reason, I'm going to cover up with the plastic garbage pail to make sure that the feeding does not get invaded. Alright, so that's where we stand with my outdoor worm bin. like I said, we're going to check back in here in another week, 10 days, just to see how things are coming along, and it should be interesting to see what the result is. And I'm also curious to see how much of that moisture is going to end up in the material itself and how the castings are going to be afterwards. So, you know, before I get to the business of putting this away and cleaning things up, why don't I really quickly bid you farewell, because cleaning up and putting things away is boring. I don't want to take up your time with that. But before I go, I just want to say thank you. Thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate your company and your support. By all means, if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to give me a thumbs up. That's really appreciated. And also consider subscribing to the channel as well. That's really appreciated too. All right, everyone, have a great day. Take care.